Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast. And we have a guest today. I haven't had a guest in a long time. I've been spending a lot of time really kind of focused on some of my specific content, but I was on Dr. Cassie Smith's podcast, right? Not too long ago. We had a really great conversation. And I thought it would be great to have her on the podcast. So we're going to have a conversation with her. She just came out with a book called Fix Your Gut, Fix Your Hormones. So we're going to talk about what that means and how we relate gut to hormones and overall health in general, and see what some of her ideas and concepts and thoughts are. And we should have a great conversation. It was on her podcast, and I'm sure it'll be on this one as well. So Dr. Cassie, how are you today? Welcome to the Thyroid Answers Podcast.
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we had a great conversation and I love talking with like-minded people. So I'm sure this will be great.
All right, well, we're going to start because as a more functional practitioner, and you're a more traditional practitioner who's now kind of moving into maybe somebody would call it more integrative medicine, maybe more functionally oriented medicine. But why? Like, you're a traditionally trained endocrinologist. What created the change that has you thinking more naturally, more functionally, more integrative at this point?
Yeah, great question. So like you said, I'm a traditional trained board certified endocrinologist. And I did that. I got out of fellowship in 2017. I did that for 3 years, just how they teach you to do. I actually did research in fellowship on GLP-1s and, things like Ozempic and Trulicity and all these drugs. And so I get out into practice and I, treated thousands of people for 3 years, exactly how they taught us in school. And I was very dissatisfied because my patients continue to get sicker. They got on more medications. They were spending more on their health care. They came in, with all these issues I couldn't address. I didn't have time to address. I didn't know how to address. And I was just really, really burnt out by 2020. And my husband's like, man, you haven't even been practicing 3 years. Like, we haven't even started to put a dent in those student loans. Like, you can't quit your job. And so I was like, well, I have to figure something else out. And so I really, I've always been very, like, I love research. My dad said whenever I was little, I would ask a million questions. So my question was like, why aren't these people getting better? So I just started doing research. Like, hey, my patients with thyroid disease, they're actually not getting better. And so through all of this, what I found was that your gut is actually a very important part of our body, but also of our endocrine system. And our fat cells are actually an endocrine organ. We just don't talk about them, right? Like, adipose tissue is a very important endocrine organ. And so I was like, wow, how did I go to fellowship in the United States and not learn about either one of these things? So I really started to learn more about your fat and all the, metabolic things that happen with fat and negativity, like all the negative cytokines, inflammatory cytokines, all the responses that fat cells give out that cause hijack our other hormones. And I also learned about your gut. And in doing so, when I started implementing this in practice, like, hey, let's actually focus on gut. Let's focus on how hormones go from a pro-hormone or a pre-hormone to an actual hormone to getting into the cell and functioning. Patients started to get better. And I did this for, 3 or 4 years. I've been doing functional medicine since about 2020, and all my patients get better. Like, it's totally night and day. And the frustrating thing for me is that when I tell people about this, they look at you like you're crazy, like you have 27 heads. Like, how do people not know this? And then how do providers not know this, right? A lot of providers in Oklahoma City told patients I was trying to kill them, I was trying to hurt them, I was crazy. Now a lot of those providers come and see me and send their family members to me. But I felt like I had to write this book because it's nothing that you learn in school. And some of it's just really basic stuff that needs to be put together in a systematic approach so people, including providers, understand it.
I think, like, somebody in functional medicine already, right? They would look at this and go, well, Cassie, of course, right?
Yeah.
This is the stuff we learned. But to be fair to allopathic medicine and to be fair to you, I'm glad that you started to see this, like, hey, something else is going on here, but it's not really part of medical training to look at maybe the root cause issues, right? We learn about the disease in traditional medicine treatment, like, what's the disease, what's the pathology, how do I manage it, how do I treat it And I don't think we put as much attention into, okay, what are the underlying mechanisms that triggered this? We're more our lab assessment is really focused on, is there a disease or that I need to treat or not treat? And we also, I think, because of the complexity of things, we have a tendency to learn systems in a box because it makes
Mhm.
it easier to learn, which is great. But then we forget to go back and tie in how they all interrelate. So how, I guess, am I missing the point from the traditional medicine standpoint, or are you learning about some of the root cause issues and potential reasons for hormone dysregulation, thyroid dysregulation, gut dysregulation, the pathologies we see? Are you learning what those things are? Or is the schooling really about identifying once disease and actually happens?
Yeah, I think a lot of school, if you really think about it, med school traditionally is biochemistry, like, right, what is happening in a cell? How do things work? How do we make ATP? And then, you move into physiology, which is like, how do all the systems of the body work together? It's kind of like a roadmap of a city, right? With all the roads, like when we used to actually have maps or when you get out Google Maps. And, so I think in school they teach us like the foundational, how things are supposed to work or how they work. I just think they're missing a lot of things, right? So like think about if you would have pulled out a map in 2000 of Oklahoma City and, been trying to navigate through Oklahoma City, you would figure it out eventually, but there's no way to update it quickly. There's no way to, like if there's something happening or a road gets closed and another one gets built, it's going to be until another map is made that you're going to know. Well, now we have phones. And so, our phone will update when there's traffic. And so I think it's the same thing in med school. We have a general idea of how we thought the body worked. But now there are all these new things from science, right? We know that our gut microbiome is so important. We have 100 times more genes in our gut than we do in the rest of our body. And so it's just like I think school is behind and actually updating and teaching providers what is actually important and how a lot of these things affect our body, right? And to be fair, people are more stressed than they used to be. They're more stimulated than they used to be. Our phones are dinging all the time. Our food is different. And so I think there just needs to be a overall facelift in the medical education system and really focusing on when these systems aren't working correctly, like instead of this lab equals this diagnosis equals this medication, it needs to be, hey, this lab means that this dysfunction is going on. We should step back and say, okay, where's this dysfunction coming from before we just write prescriptions, which cause other side effects and other things that can cause it to be convoluted. Does that make sense?
Or we need to be aware that there's dysfunction, but it doesn't require medical drugs yet or
Correct.
medical treatment, something to be cut out, but there's still dysfunction. And I think that's where we could start to kind of bring functional and traditional medicine together, is to say, okay, you guys are really good at this kind of pathology piece, identifying it and treating it. But typically we have altered function before we have dysfunction, dysfunction before we have disease. So if there is signs and symptoms, if there is a patient in a state where they have these complaints, but they don't have pathology yet, be aware that, hey, this may not be something that's ready for me yet, but there are strategies. And I think that's the piece we still need to continue to work on. And it's maybe what you're blending in your practice is, hey, I can actually see the altered function, the dysfunction before the disease. So instead of saying, hey, you don't have a condition, you're developing a condition, and there's things we can do today that don't require medication yet. But if you don't want to do those down the line, you will probably need some medication. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. We do a lot of preventative, what I like to call preventative medicine in my practice. Yes, I do think that we need to look, and when labs are abnormal and our body's not working optimally, we need to figure out why is that? And yes, instead of jumping to medications and we need to say, okay, what is dysfunctional in the body system that's causing this backup or causing this roadblock so that we can through lifestyle fix it, right? Because our bodies were made to heal themselves, but there's a lot of inputs that our body gets. And that's the other thing, it's hard. Like, when did it become so abnormal to go and eat with a group of people order a salad with chicken and maybe not a bunch of dressing and don't get alcohol. And then like you're the weird person, right? Everyone else is eating fried food and drinking alcohol. And it's like, why are you being weird? So
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of like input issues too that we really have to work on. Like some people just have to realize like our lifestyle and diet is not the same as it used to be. And whether that's wrong or right, I mean, all this changes the physiology of your body. I also think it's pretty interesting that most people, when I see them as patients, I ask them, do you treat your body as well as you treat your car? And they're kind of like, well, what do you mean? Well, how many people go to the gas station and put the wrong type of gas in their car? Nobody, because they don't want to deal with the consequences of it, right? Like if you're driving a car that requires high octane gas, are you going to go put low octane gas in it? Probably not, because you don't want to pay to fix the motor, right?
Mhm.
Or if you're driving an electric car, do you put gas in it? No. And do you take your car in for services? Yes. And so we treat our cars way better than we treat our bodies because we're inputting into our body for food choices, right? We're saying negative things to our body. So I think there are so many different things, unfortunately, that traditional medicine just doesn't have the time to address or talk about that really do affect our body. We know that our vagus nerve talks to our entire body through way of our gut. We know that we have a brain between our head, but that our gut is truly our first brain. We know that there are signals in our heart now where it's kind of like our third brain. And so there's just all these really cool ways that our body talks to each other, but nobody's ever really taught this. And so this is why, Eastern medicine, I think, does such a good job when acupuncture and all these different types of Eastern medicine, which a lot of people say is woo-woo. I mean, they still talk about all these things, right? They talk about nutrition and sleep and community and how we feel and the things we say to each other and energy. And so I think all that, you're going to have to find a way to bridge traditional medicine with these things that have worked for healing for thousands of years.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So you're in traditional endocrinology practice. You're doing what I would call maybe optimization strategy, right? Hey, this hormone's low. I'm gonna optimize it based on what a blood value is or what a lab value is.
Mhm.
We see that in traditional medicine. We see a lot in functional medicine, just using sometimes different hormones um, and different strategies. But I call that more the optimization kind of strategy. At what point did you start going, wait a minute, I'm optimizing these hormones and they still have problems? And what led you to start to think about the GI tract as a potential issue, primary issue?
So it only took about 6 months to a year to realize that what I was taught in school, 13 plus years of higher education wasn't working. And at first I was like, well, maybe it's just me, maybe it's my patients, but I would go to I went to a conference about a year into to practicing and I heard it from everyone else. All the doctors were like, this isn't working. My patients are getting worse. And so it was pretty quick that I realized, hey, this, bologna sandwich that they fed me in medical school, that like this medicine treats this disease is not the case always, right? Like people still have symptoms. And so at that point, honestly, the way I found the gut was I was a patient myself. I had had a lot of autoimmune issues. I actually, as an endocrinologist, was seeing an endocrinologist and fired one of them and got a different one. And I had seen endocrinologists as well, and I wasn't getting better and I wasn't getting the answers that I really wanted either. So it was kind of through like this medical path that I was going through at the same time where I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. Then I just started doing research. And when you start doing it, like do it for yourself, you'll see that there are thousands and thousands of studies out there about gut. And that, there's a lot of research around how your gut metabolizes your estrogen, how it converts thyroid hormone from T4 to T3, how your gut, whenever we have bad dysbiosis, it drives up our cortisol and it drives up our insulin. There's all this information out there. It's just we were never taught. And so I really started like diving into it, but it made so much sense to me because it had this great fundamental foundational background on hormones. Like I understand how every hormone, where the gland it's made in, what micronutrients and prohormones need to, the hormone to be produced, where that hormone goes and it makes its effect everywhere in the body, on every tissue in the body. What are the byproducts of that? How is this hormone metabolized? How is it recycled? How do we get a feedback to make the hormone, make more hormone? the gland make more hormone. And so I have this good base of hormones, but I still just didn't quite understand, like, hey, if you give someone thyroid hormone, why don't their levels go up? Or if their levels go up, why do they still have every symptom of hypothyroidism that they had before you gave them the hormone? And so once you start to throw the gut into there and realize there's so much inflammation and so many different reactions that happen in the gut that affect all these things, it made sense. And then whenever I went to my patients and I asked them about gut symptoms, they all had them. And then when we started cleaning their guts up, myself included, numbers changed and symptoms changed. And I'm not just a number person, but I'm a symptom person. And so it started to make sense. And that's, what we've talked about for thousands of years, if you go back in medical literature, but not what we talk about now.
Yeah. And I said, I don't know if we talked about this. I'm sure we probably did, but I say it a lot. And when we look at labs too often, I think what we're trained to do is look at the lab value and we kind of assume that it's the problem. And my argument is that's just telling us a story about the physiology. It's not actually the problem. If you think it's the problem, then optimizing the number makes sense, right? That's low. I give more. I should fix it. But the blood value is different than what's happening in the cell and the chemistry that's happening inside the cell. And I think that piece gets missed. And I say a lot that that your labs are optimized for the state you're in versus the state you want to be in. So everybody likes to think I'm healthy. I just have these abnormal lab values and we just fix the lab values, then I'll even be healthier. The reality is your lab values are abnormal or inappropriately normal because of the state you're in. So they're just telling us the story about your physiology. We don't need to manipulate them. We can, if we want, if that's what you want, we can change the numbers. But when we optimize a T3 or we optimize a TSH, or we optimize an estrogen and the patient doesn't get better, it's because they're not in a state to utilize that hormone in the first place. So optimizing the blood value doesn't always relate to I feel and function better. So that's the biggest thing that I think is important when we're looking at the lab values is, and maybe what you saw in practice. Okay, I'm taught, hey, let's improve this estrogen, let's improve this TSH, let's improve this value. But our patients aren't, even though we restored a blood value, we didn't restore normal physiology or we didn't change their state. So symptoms persist. And that's probably what you saw in practice as well. And then you start looking for, okay, what's the why? So let's talk about, go ahead.
I completely agree. That's a very good way of putting it. Like your labs will be optimized for the state that you're in.
Yeah.
So, and labs don't really matter. Like I checked them because I think when people come to you initially and they just have all these complaints and you have no idea, it's a good like general starting place, but it's never an end all be all. And I think that people have to remember too, that lab values are, a normal lab value is made off of a bell-shaped curve. And there are people to the right and to the left of a bell-shaped curve that are still normal. So you may have a different lab value than somebody else. So you have to take into account that lab value, but also symptoms. And you also have to take into account, is your body able to take these hormone labs that we're looking at actually into your cell? Because I think you and I talked about this. There's no way to measure a hormone inside a cell. When we measure blood tests, it's what's floating around in your blood. That doesn't mean that hormone then leaves your blood and actually gets into a cell to work. Because if your cell's completely inflamed and your cell membranes are locked shut because you're eating garbage, you're not sleeping enough, you have insulin resistance, you're super stressed, whatever, you have mold, then that hormone that's in the blood will never get in the cell and you'll still have symptoms. So I think that's one thing that we really miss in traditional medicine too. And that's why so many people are so sick. And I write about in the book, like, this is why we're still spending more money on healthcare. This is why you're sicker. This is why you're gaining weight, because your lab is not the end all be all. We have to get that hormone into the actual cell. And then we can test.
I totally agree with that. And the other piece of it, I think that we can add quickly, and then we're going to move on to more about the book, is every time we add more hormone to a body, we're not just adding this neutral thing, we're increasing demand. You add more T3 to a system to optimize a T3, that means you need more micronutrients, you need more amino acids, you need more oxygen, you need more antioxidants, you need more iron, you need more fuel. And most times the reason there's reduced conversion of T4 to T3 is because we don't have the capacity to have higher metabolism to begin with. So the body adaptively downregulates it. And that ties to sex hormones because you need T3 to get cholesterol into the cells to make into hormones. So it all ties together, but people hope that if they put more hormone into their system, they're going to have better function. But many times they didn't have the capacity to have a higher hormonal state to begin with. So more hormone just creates more demand in a system that doesn't have capacity, sometimes just increases the downward spiral to more dysfunction and disease, unfortunately. Sometimes it works. I mean, in a person who's very resilient, it works awesome. But that's why you can have the same tool, T3, estrogen, whatever it is, works great in one person. In another person, the third person's like, immediately, I feel terrible. Like, well, this is a great tool. It is a good tool, but not in the state you're in. That's why you're struggling with it. At least that's my opinion.
Correct.
Let's talk about the book. So you fix your gut, you fix your hormones. So what are the big challenges, gut-driven issues that result in hormone dysregulation, and why?
I think that's a good question. And I think it depends on the person, right? So you have people who are very like type A, super stressed out, typically women more than men, but not always. I think one of the things I try to drive home in the book is that stress is not benign in any way. Now, we need some form of stress, right? We're all alive because our ancestors were stressed out a little bit, right? Like they were trying to not be eaten by wolves. But you don't want to have so much stress all the time that your sympathetic nervous system never downregulates. So we need our parasympathetic nervous system to activate so that we can digest our food, so that we can rest, so that our brain can clean itself when we're sleeping. And so stress, when you have chronic stress, whether that be negative thoughts, whether that be you're in a toxic environment with like mold, whether it be you chronically have too many things to do and you're, overexerting yourself, that over time will affect your gut. Your gut has something called a vagus nerve that talks to the rest of your body. When your brain or your body feels stressed, it tells your gut that. And it will actually negatively affect your gut. It can cause holes in your gut, something called leaky gut, by way of increasing bad bacteria that grow in your gut. It can downregulate your immune system, which then causes you to get sick more often. I mean, there's lots of things that stress can do to your gut. And when this starts to happen and your cortisol levels are high and you develop leaky gut and your immune system dies, it elevates your insulin levels. And this sets off a whole cascade of issues I talk about in the book, where you develop insulin resistance, you start gaining weight, you're having issues sleeping. Now we're not making estrogen and we're not making progesterone and testosterone like we were. We're not able to recirculate or, get rid of the estrogen that our body's actually making. So we get toxic estrogen that builds up. We're not making growth hormone, so we can't sleep as well. I mean, so many things happen. And so I think stress is one thing that people don't realize actually negatively affects their gut. Some people do, right? Like if you're really stressed, if you're listening to this and you've ever been really stressed, if you have to stand up in front of people and talk or something like that, you know how you get that feeling in your stomach, right? Where you're just like, ooh, I feel like I'm going to throw up, right? That is actually stress affecting your gut in a certain way. But what we don't realize is when we chronically are stressed and we're just used to it, that's chronically happening in our gut. So we develop a lot of issues, right? So I think one of the things is stress, but the other one is food. And people, and I talk about this in the book, a lot of this is not, super fancy and beautiful. And like, it's kind of basic, but our food choices and our food system in this country is terrible. And a lot of people know that, but they still, they do what's easy, right? And what's easy is not always what's best for you. And you're going, like, I can walk in a grocery store and pretty much tell you the health of somebody by what's in their grocery cart, right? If they've got a bunch of processed food, got a bunch of packaging, canned foods, that's how your body is going to respond to, and your gut as well. And so I talk a lot about just eating, whole nutritious food. I talk about stress management, about sleep, about toxic relationships. Like all these things affect your gut. And then once your gut starts to become, deteriorated, then you're going to have issues with hormone metabolism and processing your hormones, or the hormones your doctor's giving you. Like I was that doctor giving people thyroid hormone, giving people every hormone, estrogen, testosterone, but it doesn't matter how much hormone you give someone. If it's not metabolizing correctly, you don't have the micronutrients to turn it on, you're too inflamed so you can't get that hormone into the cell, then you may end up getting more side effects from those hormones, because now they're floating around nothing to do. And now you don't know, is that hormone you're giving someone actually causing the side effects and the symptoms that they're having, or what's going on, right? And so we talk a lot about that in the book too. And I think there's a really cool chapter too about just like, how did we get here? Because a lot of people say, well, I feel like I eat pretty well, and I feel like, they feel like they do all the things that social media tells them to do. So why is my gut still bad? And so I kind of just go through and say, hey, this is what a microbiome is. This is how you're born. These are the things that affect it throughout life. A lot of people are on medications that affect their gut. And I just did a podcast episode about that, oral birth control. Although sometimes it's needed, terrible for your gut. And so there's just a lot of different things that in traditional medicine we don't talk to patients about, and they're on medications that can be affecting their gut. So lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah. So I agree. Stress is, chronic stress can be an issue. We all need to have stress. That's critically important for health and well-being. I mean, you needed to get stronger. You needed to become stronger physically, stronger mentally. So stress is rarely the issue, but what happens is, based on how intense it is or how long it is, it can put strain on the system. And strain means now my physiology has to adapt, right? Once the physiology has to adapt, short term, we're great at compensating for. It's the chronic strain that's put on the system by the stress. And for some people, they can massive loads of stress, great resiliency, no health problems, they do great. And other people, what seems like really minimal stress, because they have no capacity left, because they've already been in strain for a while, can really trigger more significant problems. So totally agree with that part. And so when we think about that, and you're talking about different types of stress and potentially the strain it puts on our physiology, then it starts to have an impact on the sympathetic, which is more the fight or flight system, defensive system, versus the parasympathetic system, which is more the rest, digest, and kind of all the cool, fun, sexy things we like to have happen, right? So,
Yeah.
and the gut is the consequence, right? I think the hormones are the consequence too. So when you see somebody with altered gut function, altered gut physiology, many times what we see is people doing a gut protocol. Like, I'm going to do a gut protocol to help my gut. But is the gut and the dysfunction we see in the gut really the root issue? Or is it the life environment, the stressors, the load we put on the system, the real root issue? And maybe we've got to do both, but I think you understand what I mean. There's a person that comes in, I've done a gut protocol. Dr. Cassie, I've done a gut protocol. I did a gut protocol. I did a gut protocol. It doesn't work. I'm telling you. Do you have a special one? But the reality is, even the gut, even though we blame the gut, and I deal with the gut too, the gut's dysfunctional. Sometimes it is the primary issue. You took a round of antibiotics, messed up the microbiome, maybe just a dietary issue, something the body doesn't tolerate well. But I think underneath it all, even the gut many times is the result and not the root cause. Doesn't mean we don't have to address it. It doesn't mean it's not a problem. But many times while we're trying to get that under control, we got to look upstream a little bit at some of these stressors that continually cause the body to be more in defensive physiology and downregulate the parasympathetics. Do you see that in your practice as well?
Yeah, I think those are really good points. And we talk about that in the book too. Sometimes I do think, yes, you do need to go through a protocol where you're doing a kill phase, you're doing a rebalance phase, you're doing whatever. But in the program that we do, not only do we do that, we have a very intentional thing we set people through, which is a coaching, like a lifestyle coaching, where we talk about sleep and we talk about deep breathing and we talk about chewing our food and we talk about, all these things, toxic relationships, how we talk to ourselves, stress, light therapy. And so I do think, to your point, a lot of it is lifestyle as well. Now, if you have a really bad bacteria or one that's producing histamine, something like that, we want to get rid of that because we don't want that, continuing to catch things on fire. We can't paint a room while it's also on fire, right? So, but to your point, yeah, these people who have done gut protocols and they're like, hey, it didn't work. The question is, okay, well, we need to really be evaluating your life, right? Like, why, how you feel. I think a lot of people have, and I talk about this, a lot of people have unresolved trauma, whether it be from childhood, whatever, a relationship, the way they got fired from a job. I mean, a lot of people have trauma, COVID, that they haven't processed. The loss of, a death of a loved one, and that trauma, that trauma that hasn't been processed also can cause issues with your gut. And so I do think, to your point, really digging in and determining, okay, why did all this start? What actually has started this is very important, because you can kill all that bad bacteria. You can rebalance somebody's gut. You can fix their immune system. You can patch all the holes they have in their gut. But if they're still getting that negative signal from their brain, right? They're getting all this toxic negative vibes or feelings, or they feel unsafe, it's just going to come back.
Yeah, because the terrain's not going to change, right? You can temporarily change it. And for the listener, when Dr. Cass is talking about like emotional stress, some people are like, come on, right? But the reality is everything that we're dealing with relationships, sleep, respiration, all of these things are either creating capacity or they're creating demand, right? And so it's cumulative over time. And if you don't address what caused the body to be in this more stressed state to begin with, all of the best protocols can make some temporary changes, but they're probably not going to provide lasting results. And I think that's sometimes a frustration, even in functional medicine, because we're saying, hey, we're a little bit more holistic. And yet to some degree, sometimes we divert just to protocols, just like medicine diverts to medications, we divert to our supplement protocols and think that's the answer. The longer I'm in it, this is probably year 32, the more I realize it's less about the supplements and the medications. It's more about the life, the lifestyle, the habits, the behaviors. And those are the toughest things sometimes to get people to change.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. It's hard for people to look in the mirror sometimes because they think, hey, I'm actually doing all the things I'm supposed to, right? And maybe those are the things you were supposed to, or that you could do when you were 20 or 30, but our bodies adapt, our bodies change. And over time, we start to, like each little piece of trauma, each little thing that happens to you into your life, it builds on it, right? And
Yeah.
we have to have coping mechanisms. We have to have tools in order to get through life, right? Like everything that you're doing everyone has hard times. And you have to have hard times to learn and to adapt, but those things start to add up, right? You start to get little marks as you age. And so what you could do in the past, maybe you can't do anymore, right? And I think sometimes that's really hard for people to hear. Like I'll have women who say, well, I went to Orange Theory and I ran marathons until I was 40 and I did it all the time. And so why can't I do it when I'm 45? It's like, well, your hormones are shifting in, when you're 45, you're perimenopausal, and we need to be nicer to our body. And, we put more miles on our body. We've just like a car, right? And so I think sometimes, to your point, yes, we really need to step back and evaluate our life and what our body's trying to tell us instead of pushing harder. Like most people listening to this podcast, right? Like, and I'm guilty of this too. Like some mornings, like yesterday, I woke up at 6:30, like woke up because I knew I needed to strength train. But when I woke up, I didn't feel great. I was just like, man, I'm still kind of tired. And so most people, when that happens, what do? They go strength train anyways, right? Because they woke up and that's what they were going to do. And so they do it. And instead, what we need to learn how to do is like, okay, listen to our body and then say, okay, well, you're tired. Maybe I should walk instead. We should really listen to the signals that we get and own those signals and adapt, right? But that's not what everyone does. And so I think a lot of times over time that creates issues because we just get used to doing what we've always done and not listen to the way that our body's asking us to adapt and change.
Yeah. And I'd add to that, because I see this in a lot of my population base and it's going to kind of go back to the state ideas, but people who are exercising every day, they are doing cold plunge every day. They're doing sauna every day. Like they're doing all these healthy things and eating a nutritious diet. They're doing everything they can that they believe is healthy, but they're not healthy. Like I'm optimizing my hormones. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm doing all this stuff is healthy. I don't know what I'm missing. And I typically explain to them, those are all healthy things if you're in a resilient state, but you're not. You're overloaded. So all that All that exercise requires more capacity. You don't have it right now. All that sauna requires more capacity. You don't have it right now. All that cold plunge is challenging the system, which demands more capacity, which you don't have right now. So these are all healthy things to do for somebody who's in a more resilient state, but you're not in it. So these are great things. But right now you can't do them because they're creating demand on a system that doesn't have it. So we have to pull some of these healthy things away temporarily and let you regain some capacity, and then you can start to add those things back. So many times, like when you're saying, hey, I did this in my 30s and 40s, well, you didn't have the same level. You have more strain on your system now. You don't have the same recovery capacity. You're pushing just as hard on a system that's starting to have some limited capacity, maybe due to age, maybe due to hormone shifts, or maybe due to a combination of factors. And you just need to create capacity so that you can tolerate those things, and you can't do them. They're all healthy, but you don't have the resiliency right now. So they're all good, but we got to, we got to moderate how much of these things, healthy things you can do, because they still create demand on the system.
Correct.
So I would like to do, maybe in this next section, maybe a little speed round. We're going to talk about a hormone. We'll just start pulling hormones. And I want, maybe you can give the listeners an explanation of how stress, strain, altered gut physiology impacts the hormone, maybe differently from what they've been taught. Okay.
Okay.
So let's use like insulin as an example. Insulin's this villain in medicine. It's terrible. It's only out to get you and to kill you and make you sick. When in reality, I look at insulin like, man, it is struggling to do its job. There's 4 hormones to raise glucose. Insulin's all by itself, trying to keep it under control. I rarely look at insulin as the issue and the problem, but maybe you see it as the bigger problem. Maybe, and I may see it differently, but let's talk how stress and strain impacts the hormone, and maybe how gut physiology plays into that as well. You game?
Yeah.
Let's talk with you. Let's start with insulin since we're already there.
Yeah. So I think if your gut is very dysregulated, whether it be you have bacterial overgrowth that shouldn't be there, bad bacteria, whether it be that you have a dysfunctional immune system, you have a leaky gut, if your gut is not regulated the way it needs to be, then what I tell my patients is your insulin levels are going to suffer from that because they're probably going to be higher. You're going to be having a lot of what's called cytokines, so like inflammatory markers that are released from bad bacteria, or your immune cells that are coming to the rescue of what's going on in your gut are going to release cytokines. And so when these inflammatory things are released in your body, it's going to trigger your body to make more cortisol and more insulin. And insulin, to your point, is a life-saving hormone that's needed because when we eat, insulin tags our glucose and then takes our glucose out of our bloodstream and puts it into our skeletal muscle so that we can function and do what we need to do. All the cells in our body need energy. They get them from glucose. But insulin is the key to driving that glucose where it needs to go. So people with type 1 diabetes in the early 1900s died because they did not have insulin before insulin was made, right? Like they had to eat a very strict keto diet or they basically died because you have to have insulin to sustain your body. And so to your point, it's not necessarily a villain, but when there's too much of it made, which is because of the lifestyle choices we made, we're stressed, we eat too much, we're not moving our body enough and getting rid of the glucose that we eat in our skeletal muscle. When there is a lot of insulin, that increased amount of insulin that's made because it's trying to push our glucose or all of our, when we're stressed, our body also releases glucose. So it's trying to push all that glucose into our body. When there's too much insulin, the problem is it can be inflammatory. And so it causes other symptoms. And when your gut is dysregulated, you don't have any extra capacity with your gut because you have bacterial overgrowth or you haven't been eating super well. Your gut is not able to kind of help adjust that insulin and help, regulate it. And so insulin is very dysfunctional in a lot of people with gut issues. So when I start seeing insulin levels that are higher and I'm asking people about their diet, if it's not a diet issue and they say they're moving their body, then my question is, okay, do we have some bacteria somewhere in your gut that are producing bad signals to our body that are then making our body make excess amounts of insulin?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think for the listener, I typically don't like the term insulin resistance. I like the term glucose resistance. And even when we see that really high insulin, it can be inflammatory. I totally agree with that. But I always look at like, why is the pancreas having to work so freaking hard? And it's because of the glucose resistance that's going on. And as Dr. Cassie said, once you start kicking in inflammatory mechanisms, cells start to have reduced transport of molecules across the membrane. One of the tools, of course, is T3 that helps with that translocation of the GLUT transporter. So once there's inflammatory mechanisms, reduced conversion of T4 to T3, all of a sudden now glucose is less. It's harder to get glucose into the cells. And now the body has to generate more glucose or more insulin, even in a fasted state, to deal with this glucose that's constantly being released. And Dr. Cassie was absolutely right, especially for those of you who try to do a low carbohydrate diet. If your body needs carbohydrates to run, or you're in stress physiology and stress hormones are upregulated, they're making glucose for you and they're dumping it out all the time, which is hard to regulate. That's why you're waking up. That's why you get your blood levels done. Your fasting insulin's elevated, even though you're on a low carbohydrate diet. Is just because you're not putting it in doesn't mean that there isn't glucose just dumping out into the system. And it's also another reason why you can't burn fat, because in the stress state, you're more anaerobically oriented and you're not going to burn fat efficiently. So little side piece there. I think since we're on it and it's one of the hottest drugs on the market today and it ties to gut function, we might as well talk about it. Ties to insulin and blood glucose regulation. That's everybody's new favorite hormone, GLP-1. So let's talk about GLP-1. What's the tie-in to gut function, gut physiology? Does nobody make it anymore? Is that does the body forget how to make it, or what's really going on?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a problem. A lot of people don't make GLP-1 like they used to, right? So it's a hormone that as we age and we maybe abuse our body and we eat too many carbohydrates and we ask our body to make too much insulin, we will make less GLP-1 because it's kind of like what I tell people is GLP-1 was made to help your stomach stretch and help you know when you should stop eating, right? It's like once you're eating and you start to get full, GLP-1 is released to tell your brain, hey, I'm good, go ahead and stop eating. But if we eat through that all the time because we like what we're eating, because our food's hyper palatable, because we just want to, because we're stressed, whatever, it's almost like you're training your body, like, hey, it doesn't matter whether that hormone's in place or not, I'm just going to keep eating. So over time, that hormone production can decrease because, again, all of our hormones they're kind of on teeter totters. They're on feedback loops, right? And so our body is very well made for, hey, we release the hormone when we need it, and then we get the feedback that it worked, and then we'll release it again. But if when we're releasing the hormone, we're not getting the feedback that, hey, that actually worked because we're eating through it and our glucose is still high, then the production of GLP-1 can decrease. Now, there are other things that can decrease it. There are medications, stress. Again, when you have certain bacteria in your gut, that take over where in your gut GLP-1 is supposed to be made or be converted, then those hormones can't work correctly. So you can lose GLP-1 production over time. Also, when you're chronically stressed from an autoimmune disease, right? If you have a lot of inflammation from an autoimmune disease, an autoimmune flare, you have all these, again, cytokines, all your fat cells are releasing toxins, then your body prioritizes what it's supposed to do. I tell everyone you wake up with $100 bill of energy every morning. You might have 20 bucks in your savings account if you're lucky from the day before, from months before. But when your body is inflamed or chronically stressed, or you get into an accident, something happens, your body is going to utilize its energy to keep you alive. And so it may not be able to utilize energy for other hormone production, for things like GLP-1, for things like growth hormone, for things like, testosterone and estrogen. And so this is where people don't realize your gut and everything that you're doing can all impact all of your hormones. Although, hey, my adrenal gland works great or my ovaries work great, I should be making estrogen. Well, you still have to have energy and you still have to have the micronutrients and the cofactors for your ovaries and your adrenal gland to make estrogen, right? And if it doesn't have the capacity to do that because it's utilizing all of its energy in your gut that's dysregulated or whatever else you need to do, your brain, because you're chronically stressed, it may not get back to that and have the energy for your body to do that. So I think people just need to realize that everything that we do affects every cell in our body.
Yeah. And for the listeners, this kind of ties into what I talk about quite a bit our body kind of operates in two different modes. One is more of a homeostatic regulation where we make enough energy from the food we take in and for what we have stored to run all the systems of the body optimally without any compromise. Like we can run it all. Perfect. The other state is a state called allostasis, where we don't have enough energy to run all the systems of the body. And when Dr. Cassie is talking about the stressed physiology, when we have stress and strain on our systems, when there's reduced energy production, now the body has to make choices. And so that's what we call allostatic regulation. I have to turn down a system that's less important right now so I can divert that energy to another system. We do it all the time. Rarely does anybody really realize that's going on at times. And if it's short term, we bounce right back. We go back to homeostatic regulation. Where problems exist is when we get into chronic allostatic regulation, and we're chronically turning down systems to deal with the most important aspects. And usually they start to turn into more defensive, pro-inflammatory processes. And as a result of that, the things we want to be happening, hair growth, hormone regulation, hormone production, sleep, digestion, good nail quality, like good skin quality, those things get downregulated because they're not important for survival. And we upregulate sympathetic nervous system. The amygdala gets upregulated. Our sleep cycle gets thrown off and we stay in more light sleep because we're trying to defend ourselves constantly. And we think that's broken physiology, but really that's beautiful adaptive physiology. You're just not meant to be in that state many times as long as we are, and we're in it. Many of us are in it and don't even realize we're in it. So it results in alterations of these hormones, and GLP-1 and insulin, probably two of the biggest ones, with what's going on today with obesity and diabetes, type 1, type 2, type 1.5, with the rise of GLP medications. These are major issues, but at the heart of it is excessive strain on the physiology, adaptive physiology, alterations in how we regulate our hormones, and ultimately we see malfunction, dysfunction, and the disease that then gets treated. Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about thyroid hormone. How does gut physiology, let's talk about a couple different ways that stress may alter gut physiology and gut physiology may impact thyroid physiology.
Yes. So we talked about how stress can affect our gut, right? So we talked about how it dysregulates the bacteria in our gut, upregulates bad bacteria, causes bad bacteria to release cytokines, which can then change the lining of our gut, the integrity of our gut, and cause leaky gut. The problem is that deiodinase, which is an enzyme that converts T4 into T3, a lot of that is in our gut. So that process happens in our gut. And when we have basically a metabolic warfare going on in our gut because of all the inflammation and the smoke, and it's hard for that T4 to convert to T3. And so a lot of people, our brain gives a signal by way of TSH from our pituitary. That TSH goes to our thyroid and tells our thyroid to make thyroid hormone. Now you have to have proper amounts of iodine to make thyroid hormone, which we absorb from our gut. And we don't eat a ton of iodine typically in America because we're not big, unless you live on the coast, we're not big seafood people, right? We're not big seaweed people. And so a lot of people are iodine deficient, which then will not allow them to make thyroid hormone, which our brain is asking for. But let's say that somebody has enough iodine that they can actually make thyroid hormone. Well, our thyroid hormone's made, most of it in the form of T4, leaves our bloodstream, and then it has to be converted to T3 by these enzymes. Now, the problem is these enzymes convert T4 into either free T3, which then goes into our cell and is utilized by our body, or something called reverse T3, which is a hormone that is not utilized by our cells. It's actually made for when we are in acute stressful situations. It's kind of like a safety brake for our body where, whoa, I'm super, something bad just happened. Instead of making a bunch of reverse T3, I'm going to shunt some of this instead of making a bunch of free T3, I'm going to shunt this to reverse T3. The problem is that most Americans have upregulated enzymes and they're making reverse T3 out of their T4 because things that upregulate that enzyme are things like medications, insulin resistance, chronic stress, stress, sleep deprivation. So there's a lot of things that we do that change the way those enzymes work in our gut. And so people are making a hormone that then is inactive. And so what we need to happen in our gut is T4 needs to convert to T3, free T3. That enzyme that is upregulated, that upregulates and converts T4 to T3, it's very important that we have good gut physiology. It's important that we have low working insulin levels. It's important that we, are eating good nutritious food so that we have iron and we have vitamin D and B and iodine, all the cofactors we need for thyroid hormone production and conversion. And so what people don't realize is, oh, well, I'm popping my thyroid medicine my doctor gave me, so it doesn't matter. Well, even if your doctor is giving you a T3 medication, right? I'm taking free T3, it doesn't matter. Well, that still has to then go in, and even if you're taking a T3, unless it's Cytomel only, Armor, Ren Thyroid, NP Thyroid, they have T4 in them. And some of that T4 is supposed to be converted to T3. But once you have the T3, assuming it gets converted in your gut, that T3 then still has to go to your cell, and your cell has to open the door and accept the T3 in. The cell that helps your hair grow, the cell that helps your nails grow, the cell that helps your metabolism, the cell that, is driving energy production. And when your gut is dysfunctional, like we talked about, and your insulin's high and you don't have any GLP-1 and your cortisol levels are high and they're releasing all these cytokines, your fat cells and adipose tissue are releasing cytokines because you're stressed out, those cell doors are like locked, double locked, triple locked, because your cell's like, whoa, what is going on out there? It's like a toxic warfare out there. I don't want anything in here. And so your T3 is sitting there knocking on the cell door like, hey, I took my T3, I'm ready to come in. But the cell's not accepting it because you have so much dysfunction in your gut. And so I think people don't realize that although, maybe your labs look good because you're taking a T3 and it's floating around in your blood, it doesn't mean it's actually getting into the cell. And so I think, I try to tell myself every day, like when I'm picking foods, because I'm like everyone else. Sometimes I'm like, man, I just want a brownie, right? Or I just want to drink a Diet Coke. But you have to realize when you do that, every decision you make of inputs into your body affects a lot of outputs, right? It affects your gut, literally affects everything in your body. So I think that that's something, and there's a whole chapter in my book where I explain this just about thyroid hormone. And that happens with every hormone in your body, estrogen, progesterone. So your gut being dysregulated or you having poor sleep or choosing poor food choices can really impact how your thyroid hormone is made, how it's converted, and then whether what is converted is actually getting into the cell. And that includes what you're taking. So if you're just taking a thyroid hormone and you're like, oh, it's fine, same thing. It doesn't mean just because you're taking it, your body can use it.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of summarize that a little bit, maybe add a little bit but I think Dr. Cassie is exactly right. Like when you have stress physiology going on for whatever that reason it is, right? We're in that kind of adaptive physiology. There's those inflammatory molecules that are circling around. They are going to result in reduced conversion of T4 to T3, increased deactivation of thyroid hormone. Why? Because when there's stress physiology bias, like, whoa, we got to slow down metabolism. There's a bacteria, there's a threat, there's a virus, there's lack of resources, lack of energy, whatever it is. So it's an adaptive response. Absolutely right. T4 then is going to be increased deactivation to reverse T3. And that's going to result in hypothyroid signs and symptoms, unfortunately. Even if your TSH is normal, even if you have a normal total T4 and it's not broken physiology, it doesn't need to be fixed with medication. It needs to be understood. And then we should say, oh, you got all the stress on your physiology. Yeah, we should expect your thyroid hormone is going to be downregulated. That's an appropriate response. And one of the points she made too is about T3. And even if we take T3, it can change the blood value, but it doesn't necessarily mean it changes the tissue level and the cellular level. And that same enzyme that was deactivating T4 to reverse T3 can also act on T3 and deactivate it as well. We just don't measure T2 in a traditional lab, so we don't see how much of that is going on. And there's definitely some complexity to it. The other thing that's really important, and I want to touch on this, is that when there is reduced T4 to T3 conversion impacts lots of different cells, especially when we have reduced T3 in the bloodstream, it impacts the liver. And one of the big ways it impacts the liver is you can't pull cholesterol in. If you can't pull cholesterol into the liver, you're going to have a hard time making healthy bile. If you can't make healthy bile, then you're not getting enough bile that's going to enter the GI tract. So what happens without the cholesterol, without the right balance there, we don't get good gallbladder contraction. We don't get good concentration of bile. We don't get flow out of the bile duct through the sphincter of Oddi appropriately, because guess what else helps regulate the sphincter of Oddi is T3. And now without that bile, we have lost our direct antimicrobial effect at the upper end of the GI tract. We lost the indirect effect of bile acids at the lower end of the GI tract for their antimicrobial effect. And now we've got more likelihood for dysbiosis, fat malabsorption, micronutrient issues. And with the change of bacteria, with the change of bile acids absorbed, it goes to one of the things Dr. Cassie was talking about before, which is we lose control of the tight junctions in the GI tract. So now that contributes to the leaky gut scenario. So now we have the leaky gut scenario, undigested food peptides crossing the barrier, triggering more immune activation, more inflammatory activation, more gut-based organisms leak out of the GI tract into the bloodstream. And now we get activation against these, what we call pathogen-associated molecular peptide, these pieces of bacteria, whatever, that float out. Now the immune system is pissed off, activated, and these things float around in the bloodstream, activating immune cells, getting your immune system on alert. And the other thing that can happen, and this is in the literature, but the organ that has actually receptors for these same damage-associated molecular peptides, pathogen-associated molecular peptides that can be released from the GI permeability is the thyroid gland. And when they bind to the thyroid gland, they can initiate thyroiditis. We think it's an immune dysregulation, but it's all part of this kind of process. I would tell you it's probably adaptive. Somebody else may say it's an immune system lost control. But there's so many ways that when we have stress physiology that disrupts gut, stress physiology changes thyroid signaling, and thyroid physiology that then it just exacerbates the whole scenario. And we get more thyroid issues, more thyroid gland issues, more thyroid conversion issues, more thyroid signaling issues in the cell, and becomes super complex. All right. Yeah. I think that's enough of that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about.
It's all very complicated, which is why I wrote the book.
Yeah, we try and simplify, but it's all complicated. Let's, in the little bit we have left, we're going to cover a couple more. How would stress physiology, altered gut function impact? Let's go estrogen.
Yeah, great question. So I think what people don't realize is we have something called the estrobolome, which I read about in the book, which is a certain type of bacteria in your gut that are only there to help you metabolize, package, and remove estrogen. And so with women and men, because men actually have estrogen, we have to realize that once estrogen goes through our body and it exhibits all the good benefits that we need from estrogen, it helps with brain health, it helps with blood flow to our heart, it helps with our skin, our mucosal surfaces, our mouth, our vagina, our, everything. So when our estrogen is done being utilized, it goes to our liver, like you were talking about. And in our liver, it goes through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 deconjugation and metabolism. And so, yes, you need a functioning liver for that to happen. You also need micronutrients for this to happen. So when you have a bad gut and you're not absorbing B vitamins and your body can't make glutathione, it becomes an issue. But in our liver, once our estrogen rolls through there and it's done, our liver basically packages it up. It kind of bubble wraps it and it says, hey, it conjugates it, it adds different molecules to it. But the way to think about it is it wraps it up in bubble wrap. And it says, okay, you're in bubble wrap. I'm going to push you out with the bile into the stool so that you can be excreted from the body because I don't want you anymore. Like, I'm done with you. You've been used. And so that's a good thing because we're making more estrogen, right? The problem is when that package goes back into our gut, a lot of people are severely constipated, right? And so when we're constipated, there are certain bacteria in our gut that are making more beta-glucuronidase, and those enzymes will go and unwrap that estrogen that was packed up in our gut if it sits there too long, or if we have too many of those bad bacteria because our bacteria is dysregulated. Our estrobolome will work against us. It will unpackage that estrogen, or it will put little holes in that packaged up estrogen and allow that estrogen to seep out when it was on the way out. Interestingly enough, certain bacteria can take that estrogen that's usually like a 17 hydroxyestrogen and can convert it to a 4 hydroxyestrogen or an estrone, which is a bad estrogen. Some of these gut bacteria we'll conjugate it to a 16 hydroxyestrogen, which is more of a proliferative estrogen, which causes a lot of symptoms like breast tenderness, really bad PMS symptoms, things like that. So when women come to me and they're like, man, I feel great except for 1 month out of my cycle, and I have terrible breast tenderness and I have the worst PMS symptoms, they usually have a gut issue. They have an estrobolome issue because either that or they have an issue where their estrogen is metabolizing incorrectly. But a lot of times that happens in their gut or in their liver. And so our gut is so important with the way that our estrogen is packaged up and then gotten rid of, because if we allow our body to unpackage that hormone in a way that it shouldn't be unpackaged and then definitely convert it to a different type of that hormone, then we end up with a lot of different side effects and symptoms. And estrone is the bad estrogen. It's the estrogen that stimulates the breast tissue. So there are two different receptors in your breast that are alpha and beta, and it stimulates the bad receptors in your breast that ultimately can increase the risk of the way our DNA folds and make breast cancer. So our gut is very important in the way that we metabolize estrogen. And it can also be so important that, I mean, this is why some people are at higher risk of breast cancer than others. You can measure serum estrone levels in women, and if they're really high and they're having a lot of gut dysfunction, you know, hey, we've got to fix this because estrogen is needed. It's just your body is metabolizing your estrogen incorrectly.
So let's touch on that a little bit, because every woman has some estrone, right? So it's not necessarily that all estrone is bad, but it is, we need to keep it within a certain range. And the other part I want to talk about is that you could, and you hit, is good that you talked about the 16-OH, because there are women who have signs and symptoms of estrogen, what looks like estrogen dominance, and then they get their blood levels done, and their estradiol could be low, and yet they still have what appears to be elevated, like, or estrogen dominant symptoms, all because of this metabolite. Correct on that?
Correct. So your blood levels can be low, but you have all these proliferative estrogen symptoms. Your breasts are tender, you have terrible cramps, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't understand why. And you go to the doctor and they say, well, it's not estrogen, you're estrogen deficient. They give you estrogen. It makes the symptoms worse because it's not that you're estrogen deficient. It's that the estrogen you have is metabolizing incorrectly, or your body's trying to get rid of it. It's recirculating. And so actually more estrogen can make it worse. What we need to do is go to your liver and figure out, how do we help your liver metabolize that estrogen appropriately? How do we make sure you're going poop every day? How do we make sure? So it's more of a liver gut issue than it is an estrogen issue a lot of times.
Yeah. All right. So we've got about 15 minutes left. Okay. 14 minutes left. So I want to talk about, we could spend all day talking about the individual hormones, but we hit some of the biggies. What's the consequences? And since we just talked about taking estrogen on top of maybe having poor detoxification pathways, poor gut, when somebody has low hormone and they're given or prescribed hormone, what are the things that they need to be considered of? Let's start with estrogen. If you're told, hey, your hormones are low, what should give somebody pause if they start taking hormone replacement therapy? Or what are the steps that you recommend? Hormones low, I've got high symptoms, low hormone symptoms. Should I just go right to hormones? Or what's your, let's talk estrogen. What's the strategy that you think that people should consider before they jump to taking hormone replacement therapy? What are the considerations they have to think about?
Well, I think it depends on the age of the person, right? But I think if you're having hormone symptoms, then think about your lifestyle. Think about your gut. Like, are you doing the things that you're supposed to be doing? Are you eating the right food? Are you sleeping correctly? Do you have bowel movements every day? You know, what does your liver enzymes look like? Do you drink a lot? So before somebody just, starts taking hormones, the question is it really a hormone deficiency? Because sometimes hormones get blamed for insulin issues. Sometimes you get blamed for stress issues. Sometimes, so I think that you do really need to have somebody who understands how to interpret labs, look at them as a whole, look at your symptoms, and then figure out, is this really a hormone deficiency? Because again, the blood value can be very different than what's actually getting into the cell.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say, and some people may not care, right? They were just like, my hormones are low. They say that's going to fix it. I'm going to do it without taking into the other considerations. But my advice would be when you see, when you're told you have low hormones, that your signs and symptoms are a result of the hormones. This value's low, you have symptoms, therefore we need to raise this value. I think you take a minute and consider that the labs are not the problem. They're telling you a story about your body. And yes, I think age does matter because we expect to see different values at different ages and different values at different ages, maybe normal, maybe abnormal. But we have to take into consideration that the labs aren't the problem, and they're really telling us a story about the physiology. Um, yeah, so I think we answered that one. And I think that really covers probably all of them. Would you agree that it's same thing with thyroid physiology, same thing with anything else? Always consider why it's that way before we just optimize it.
Yeah, because again, if you just throw a hormone at somebody and the hormone can't get into the cell, it's not going to fix the symptom anyways. So we need to figure out now if they, if you're missing a gland, like if you've had your thyroid gland surgically removed, you need thyroid optimization. But there are other things that we can do sometimes to help our body optimize hormone production. And so, it's a big jigsaw puzzle, and that's why it is really important to go to somebody to figure out. Because also, I will tell people if you've got a lot of stress, you've got a lot of inputs, you've got a lot of stuff going on, and your whole system is really wobbly and about to break, maybe we do need to give you some hormone support of something for a little bit of time while we're trying to figure this out, right? And then it doesn't mean we always have to stay on it, but it depends on, everyone is different. It depends on your situation. But at the same time, you also need to be looking at what is causing this whole system to be wobbly and how do we go and actually address that. And a lot of times it's very simple things like your gut, your stress, your lifestyle, etc. So the answer is not always just prescribing 6 medications, 4 peptides, and 27 supplements.
Mhm.
Sometimes the answer is let's really look at all the inputs, figure out what inputs we really need and what inputs we can take away so that we can start, fixing everything from the beginning of where the hormone is being produced or the micronutrients that it needs.
Okay. So let's talk about the book. What are people going to learn in the book so that they know why they should pick this book up?
I mean, I literally put everything I know about hormones in the gut in the book. It's like a 400-page book. So you're going to learn what is your microbiome, what is your estrobolome, how did we get here? There's 10 simple steps of how do we fix our gut? Like how do we just go and completely revamp our microbiome? And then there's dedicated chapters to each hormone. So if you're like, all I want to learn about is estrogen, go to the estrogen chapter. And I talk about everything we just talked about in more depth, how estrogen is metabolized, how it's shunted down different pathways, ways that you can help your estrogen be metabolized down different pathways. I talk about thyroid hormone. I talk about testosterone, progesterone, growth hormone, which is vital to sleep and longevity. So I talk about each hormone, DHEA, melatonin, separately. And I teach you what is the hormone, what gland is it made in, what does it do in your body, and what can we do to optimize the production of this and make it better. I also have a disease-specific section of the book. So I talk about PCOS, infertility, and menopause, because those are the big buckets of hormones that a lot of women have issues with. And so if you just want to go to those chapters, we talk about those. And actually, I was talking about PCOS as a metabolic issue, not just a hormonal issue for years. I can prove it because it was in my book that came out before this new PCOS classification that just came out. But I talk about how PCOS is a whole metabolic issue. There's actually 7 different types of PCOS. Depending on what type of PCOS you have, depends on how you should treat it. Birth control is not the treatment. So I talk about all that in the book. And then at the end, I give you a blueprint like, hey, if you want to do a gut study on yourself, do one. Let me show you how to read it. Let me tell you what it means. And then let's talk about how you can fix any abnormality you would have on a gut test. What are ways that you can address the fact that you have leaky gut? What are ways that you can address the fact that you have, low secretory IgA or a bad immune system? And so I just kind of lay all that out for you as well. The very last chapter is basically what we've been talking about. Like there's no magic pill. There's no magic fairy dust. Your body has systems. There's a very set way that it works. And there's a 10-step approach that you can literally fix your body starting from the cell membrane layer, getting cholesterol and making good, healthy cell membranes and unlocking those cell membrane doors all the way up to fixing your gut. And then, hey, do we need to add hormones? What about our nutrition? Let's talk about movement. Let's talk about light, chronic stress, toxic relationships, toxic environments. Like there's just kind of a summary at the end of it as well. So there's a lot of stuff in there. And I think, people can use it for lots of different ways, but depending on what you want it for, I mean, I've read it 3 or 4 times and every time I'm like, oh yeah, I put that in there too. So there's lots of stuff you can learn in there. And there are pathways that I break down, just like you and I broke this down. Each chapter has what I call a call out box. And I literally kind of show you with a diagram form, like how these hormones get dysregulated in kind of a simpler term. And then all the labs that you need to look at too, in order to just know, or labs that your doctor can order to help you figure out, hey, is this dysregulated or not? So lots of stuff.
Is there in your book, because a lot of people don't go to functional medicine practitioners and they go to general, traditional medical physicians who aren't maybe thinking about this more root cause issue. Is there a place in the book, or do you have, if it's not in the book, can you provide some guidance to help somebody who's seeing a traditional practitioner, help them communicate with that practitioner to explain to them that maybe they want something different than what their medical doctor's giving them? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, there's lots of good little, like I said, I call them call out boxes. So they're nice little like brief sections where it's like, hey, this is why you should do this. This is how you do this. This is how this hormone affects this. And so I think there are some tips throughout the book of how to do that. Also, I would recommend, providers read the book too, because I think I did a good job of making it where it's basic enough that people understand it and can get a lot of help, but providers can learn a lot of stuff from it as well. So I do think there are, I have like if there's a website for the book as well, people can go to and download all sorts of free resources. There's a free resource about like, hey, here's the labs that you should ask your provider to run. And hey, here's how they would be interpreted from a functional medicine standpoint. And so there is lots of different tons, like we have an entire website with just free resources as well. So yes, there is information in the book.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this up. So where do people go to learn more about you? Where do they go to buy the book if they want to buy the book? So, and where do they follow you if they want to follow you on social media or something?
Yeah. So the book's on Amazon. You just type in Fix Your Gut, Fix Your Hormones, or Dr. Cassie Smith. It should come up. So it's on Amazon. I'm on social media at modern endocrine _. So it's just MODERNENDOCRINE _. So I do a lot of stuff on social media. Our website is www.modern-endocrine.com. There's a become a patient page, talks about everything that we do. And then I have the podcast Hormones, Metabolism, and You that I had you on. And so I think those are all the places you can find me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I wish you the best with the book, and maybe we'll have another discussion somewhere down the line, real specific on maybe one specific area. But thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.